everyone. It is May 20th, Friday, 2016, and we're back again with more Prepare to Try. Today we're going to talk about efficient and safe exploration. Now, to explore this game efficiently and safely, there are a couple of key concepts that we need to learn. These three key concepts are resource management, threat assessment, and thorough exploration. Let's begin with resource management. The most important thing about managing your resources in this game is making the most out of your Estus flasks. Estus flasks can be refilled every time that you go back to a bonfire. However, going back to a bonfire resets enemies. So, to make any progress, you need to be able to defeat enemies quickly and efficiently without going through too many of your flasks. There are many different tricks you can use to get the most out of your flasks. One of them is playing defensively and just not getting hit. That is, of course, the dream. However, that's not always a possibility. There are a lot of enemies in this game, and they tend to come at you from a lot of different angles. So ensuring that you don't get hit all of the time is basically impossible. There are, however, a couple of things that you can do to make your healing items go further and do more for you. I'm going to intentionally take some hits here so I can demonstrate. Wake up. Alright, so we just took some damage here. Now, your first instinct upon taking damage might be to immediately heal yourself. However, that's actually not a very good use of your flasks. There is no overhealing in this game. In other words, if you simply heal every time you take minor damage to top yourself off, you will be wasting a lot of the effective healing that you get from your items. Let me demonstrate. I'll get hit again. Anytime Alright, we've taken more severe damage now. I'm going to heal again. Now you'll notice that by healing in that way, we're not fully topped off. However, more importantly, we have fully used that Estus flask. There was no healing wasted there. Now, we're not in particularly good shape right now because I've intentionally wasted some flasks to demonstrate my point. But let's keep going for a little bit. Fortunately, that actually illustrates my next order of business here, the Estus refill mechanic. While you traverse the world and defeat enemies, your flask will gradually refill. It's not entirely well understood at the moment exactly how it works, but it sort of works in that as you defeat more enemies, a sort of hidden meter fills up, and when it fills up you get an extra flask. However, this will not help you if you are full up on flasks, so don't be shy about using at least one. This incentivizes you to defeat enemies that you think you can defeat without too much trouble. It also incentivizes you to take some risk and go after stronger enemies because they have a greater chance of filling up that refill bar. Moving on, let's talk a little bit about focus points. Focus points, that blue bar in the middle up by everything else, essentially act as your resource for special moves and spells. For instance, with focus points, we can use Dance. Quite powerful. However, this is a limited resource. That was close. Making the most of your focus points is not unlike making the most of your health. We can use our Ashen Estus now to refill our focus points. However, that might have been a waste. Generally speaking, especially with focus points, since there's no real penalty for letting the bar hit 0, as opposed to, dying, you want to wait until the last possible moment to refill your bars, simply so you can get the most out of your healing items. Now, your focus points can really turn the tide of battle. However, you want to make sure not to use them frivolously. So, this fella is using a shield, which makes our stance very powerful. We essentially get a kick with range and damage by using the light attack with stance. However, that does drain focus points. So, it would be foolish to go ahead and use it on this enemy, because he has no shield. My dog agrees. Essentially what you want to do is make sure that when you're using a resource, you're getting something out of it that you would not otherwise be able to. If I can find the ladder here, I'm going to head back up. Sometimes it is wiser to simply go back to a bonfire and reset everything, and simply try again. Sometimes fights don't really go the way that you want them to, and it would be better to simply sort of start over with a clean slate and try again with full resources so you can conserve more and progress farther. Now, of course, one important part of resource management is making sure that you don't have to use resources in the first place. So that brings me to my next point, defensive posturing. We could simply go charging across this causeway. However, there are more enemies waiting for us and it becomes much more dangerous. Instead, we can take it slowly. And deal with the enemies as they come, instead of aggroing them all at once. This makes it much more likely that we will be able to get through this unscathed, especially if a dog gets caught behind a statue. When fighting, it's a good idea to continually back up towards a cleared area. This ensures that you don't accidentally advance to another area with enemies that are still alive. Having reinforcements appear for the bad guys in the middle of a fight can easily mean a death. As you progress in the game, you'll actually find some alternate sources of healing. Some items grant a regeneration effect that will refill your HP over time, such as blessed weapons, and certain rings as well. Available more early are miracles, which are support spells, many of which can heal your... Essentially, it's a trade of focus points for health. Naturally, health is the more important resource for most characters, so it's usually a good trade. However, it does cut into your ability to use offensive focus point applications like Stance or Farron Dart. Though it seems somewhat of a stretch to call Farron Dart offensive. Damage, yay! Alternative sources of healing are usually less effective than simply using an Estus flask. However, they're supplementary, and they let you conserve your flask for moments when you really need them. As you might have noticed, using a flask is very fast. Too fast, some would argue. Healing is almost instant, and you don't need a lot of breathing room to actually get in there and heal. Still, you need some. Brings me to my final point: how to successfully recover your souls and how to conserve your supply of embers. To retrieve the souls that you lose upon death, you simply need to go back to the spot where you died and interact with your bloodstain, and you'll get them all back. However, this poses risks. Some of the risks are obvious, like simply having to go through an area again with spawned enemies. However, there's a couple of risks that you might not initially think of. For one, after you die in Ember form, your maximum HP is cut by quite a bit, so we have less breathing room to work with. There's also a certain element of impatience. You want to hurry and get your souls so that you don't die again and lose them, but this also presents a danger of going too fast and getting yourself into a situation where you'll be overwhelmed by too many enemies. For instance, by aggressively charging forward to deal with the Halberd Hollow, we attracted the attention of the Great Axe Hollow. We were fortunate enough to be able to finish off one before the other really appeared, but slightly mistiming that engagement can lead to a difficult situation. Now we have everything back. As an aside, you can kill the Pus of Men before they even appear just by killing the hollow that they inhabit. Wasn't even really intentional there. He was just standing close to the archer I was trying to kill. Now, before we continue our explorations, we need to address the point of the fact that we have less health than we started with. Essentially, this is a decision that you have to make about how confident you're feeling. If you are feeling confident in your ability to get through an area, then it's actually wise to pop an ember. The extra leeway it gives you will essentially preserve the embered state if you think you can get through without dying again. If you don't think you can do that, then it's best to stay unembered for the time being, until such a time where it would be advantageous to be embered again. Usually this is, say, right before a boss, or once you have a better lay of the area, or if there's a special NPC phantom encounter you want to trigger. Knowing when and where to ember is something that mostly comes with experience. For now, let's stay in our unembered state, just to preserve the fairly fragile supply of embers that we have. There are ways to get more reliably later in the game, but Tutorial Man is not quite there yet. Now that we've discussed resource management in depth, let's move on to my next key point. Threat assessment. When you're going through an area for the first time, you need to make decisions about how you deal with the enemies that you find. Sometimes these enemies are largely trivial, like these hollows that barely react when you go up to them. However, as you progress, you will find enemy encounters that are more difficult, and they require certain approaches. The key to getting through and surviving is finding and properly executing the proper approach. Now, the most important thing to this concept is the idea of knowing what your enemy can do. This will require some experimentation on your part, or if you're feeling less bold, some research. By this point, we have a pretty good idea of what all of these hollows can do. However, we also know that there's a lot of them. So the correct approach here is not immediately evident. We could simply charge forward and hope to take them out one by one, or we could go for a more conservative approach and lure them towards us. However, this brings me to my next point, which is sort of concurrent with knowing by enemy. Knowing by environment. If we progress here, not only do we get these hollows' attention, we also summon forth a large angry dragon. Now, a first-time player would have to half the parts of this defeat. However, one might notice that this dragon can actually damage enemies as well. This presents a novel solution to a fairly serious problem of dealing with all of those hollows in such a narrow space. Of course, this also presents a new challenge in dealing with the dragon fire. So now that we know, when we approach, the dragon will breathe fire that more or less covers the entire walkway. This environmental hazard is simply a test of timing. You can actually survive fairly handily 1 or 2 breaths of fire. However, more than that, and it gets dicey. You also have to make a decision about whether or not you want to go up there or simply avoid the dragon entirely. For now, let's go with the safe route and see if we can find a way around. However, we need to be quick about it. If you're concerned about making it through in time, tossing an ember here is actually not a bad idea. If you're quick, you can usually make it, and you don't dawdle like I do. You might think that that wooden outcropping might provide some cover, but it really doesn't. Simply taking off at a full sprint little ways away from the dragon. Oh god, chug chug. Hang in there, computer. Now here comes an entirely novel enemy. We have not encountered a Lothric Knight before. We have no idea what this enemy is capable of, so a bit of defensive posturing is useful here. By assuming a defensive position and letting him attack without retaliating lets us have a better idea of what he's capable of without necessarily putting ourselves in danger. Now, Lothric Knights are difficult enemies to defeat. They're not without weaknesses, but a new player can easily run into trouble here. To that end, when you go into new areas and fight new enemies, it's important to always have a backup plan. What do you do if this fight starts to go sour? Well, in this case, we do have something that can help us. We can retreat back down and lure him into the dragon fire. It's not necessary at this point, but if things really do go south, then we do have a backup plan. Of course, that backup plan is not without its own dangers. We can also get roasted. Most of the time, a backup plan just simply consists of being able to retreat into a previously cleared area. Now that we have a better idea of what this guy can do, we are better equipped to fight him. We know that he enjoys shield blocking and shield bashing. We can use this to our advantage by using a stance of our own. After dealing that decisive blow to him, simply finishing him off is not a big deal. Simply being vigilant is also something that helps. Tower lies one of the key concepts of exploration in this game, a new bonfire. Here's an important concept that might not be readily apparent. Lighting a bonfire will set this bonfire as our new spawn point should we die. So if the worst happens and we find ourselves in a bad situation and end up eating it, we will respawn here. However, since we have not rested at that bonfire, we have not healed, refilled our flasks, but also, the enemies have not respawned. Since we're in actually pretty good shape here, that is optimal. It means that we can retrace our steps with relative safety and explore side paths without having to worry about clearing this entire area again. Before we deal with the dragon, and what he might potentially be guarding, I want to progress a little bit more to illustrate one of my final points. My final point being, considering your options. Now, there's another touch of mana here, and as the very dangerous foes. Dangerous enough that perhaps a change in approach is necessary. We have tried defeating these enemies with simply sword and shield. It can work. It's difficult. Against such powerful enemies, it may be worthwhile for different kinds of ways of damaging them. For instance, the game just gave us some fire bombs, so let's try them out. As it turns out, the Puzzle Man is resistant to fire. Here is the Puzzle Man. By hitting this enemy with a fire-based attack like a fire bomb, it goes into a state where it cannot effectively retaliate. For a little while. Themselves also do quite a bit of damage. This illustrates a very important point. Most enemies in the game tend to have, if not out-and-out weaknesses, they tend to have vulnerabilities to certain tactics. Not all of them are as extreme as the Puzzle Man's weakness to fire, but all of them will help you. Discovering them is simply a matter of experimentation and research. The best advice I can give in considering your options is to simply experiment with them. The game gives you a bunch of fire bombs, why not try them out? Now we move on to the final concept, final key point that I want to talk about, and that is thorough exploration. After defeating the Puzzle Man, we have come across a fairly lengthy split. Not only do we have a choice in ways to go here, we can either descend the ladder and explore a manor, or descend another ladder and go directly down to the bottom. There's also the matter of the dragon and what he was guarding on the upper level. So to deal with this dilemma, we need to go with the old adage of leaving no stone unturned. No stone unturned. How you tackle these areas is largely a matter of preference. However, there are a couple of tips that I can give you to make it safer and more efficient. For one, I have generally found that exploring areas nearer to a bonfire first will save you some time in the long run. This is especially true if those areas are particularly dangerous, like, say, if they're guarded by a giant dragon that shoots fire. Essentially, since this area is so close to the bonfire, if we make a mistake and die, which is entirely likely, then the amount of time we have to spend to get back to our bloodstain and retrace our steps and deal with enemies is greatly reduced. Getting this out of the way early just sort of streamlines the process later on in the area. So here we are, back in one of the first splits we encountered, up the stairs, or down towards the bonfire. This time we're going to go up the stairs. Despite how deeply unwise that might look. Largely unscathed. And we gain access to this tower, which brings me to my next point that I want to address. Learning to recognize certain level design tricks and flourishes that the designers at From Software are fairly fond of. For instance, they love shortcuts and recursive design. Rather than making us go through the Dragonfire again, to access that area, we can simply open that door and really go to and from this tower at our leisure. There are many areas in the game like this that are not nearly as insurmountable as they seem once you explore them and find alternate routes through. Of course, we still have the issue of dealing with the Dragonfire and picking up those items, but now that we have a clear run back to the bonfire, any mistakes here are more or less trivial. We might die picking these up, but even if we do, it's not really a big deal. We're not embered. We're very close to a bonfire. There are not very many enemies in this area. At least none that won't be taken care of by the dragon. And we, more or less, have free license to experiment and see what we can get away with. Because you can be reckless and stupid doesn't necessarily should be. It's just an option that you have to test your own limits. Fire, so one moment, thank you. That was sort of awkward. I was stuck in the got to play more wrong. Anyway, as I was saying before my feet got lit on fire, the reason that you want to explore thoroughly is not only to find shortcuts like that, but also to find valuable items that can help you. For instance, the Claymore. We can't use it just yet because we don't have the stats, but with fairly minimal investment, you can use the weapon and find it to be a very powerful greatsword with a very unique and adaptable moveset. The Claymore is fairly unique for this point in the game. You can get it later as a random drop from enemies, but for now that's your only source of one. And it's quite a powerful weapon. Exploration is not something you simply do just because you want to. It's because it has tangible rewards that help you survive. There is an inverse to this, actually. As you progress in the game, maybe you've beaten it once or twice, or you've simply been through this area on a different character, or you've seen somebody else play through it, or whatever. Something fairly important I have found is that you should pick up items even if you don't feel like you need them. All items on the overworld are represented by those glowing white orbs, so you can't actually tell at a glance without foreknowledge what an item you're picking up is. So if, for whatever reason, you know beforehand that these items are throwing knives, and you don't want throwing knives, you might be tempted to just leave them be. However, you might not always remember that. And it's better just to have an extra set of throwing knives that you don't need than to leave an item ungathered and then come back for it later only to find that it's throwing knives. Just be thorough. You might need those throwing knives. Who knows? If you really dislike the inventory clutter, you can simply sell off extra items or store them in your bottomless box at the bonfire. Another important point to make note of is the difference between locked doors and doors that do not open from this side. Doors that do not open from this side do not require keys. They simply require you approaching them from a different angle. So you'll often open them up just in the normal course of exploration of the level. However, locked doors are different. They do require keys, and keys are not always found in the same area. For instance, you will not get the key to this door for quite a while until you talk to a certain NPC in Firelink Shrine. And even if you can find a key in the area where it is relevant, that doesn't necessarily mean the key is going to be on the main path. If we want to talk to the person inside that prison cell, which we do, then some fairly thorough exploration of the area is necessary. We come across another fork here. We can simply descend on this ladder, or we can explore this area, which is more of like a residential area. Generally speaking, the direct path is the one you want to take the last because it has the least items. However, if you're actually in a bad way, and you require a bonfire or some other breaking point, then simply going for the most direct path can pay dividends. Going off the beaten path might lead you to difficult enemies, such as this great shield and spear-wielding enemy. He can be quite difficult to defeat, even more so than the Lothric Knight with the sword and normal shield. This leads me to one of my final points I want to make in this episode. Break everything. If you come across an item that looks destructible in the environment, like basically anything that looks ramshackle or wood, try rolling into it. Not only is it very satisfying and fun to do, it may sometimes give you the secret. Such as this valuable Astora Straightsword. Now, what I did there was somewhat unwise. By going this route first, we did get a secret item, but we also put ourselves in a bad situation. There are many enemies patrolling in this area, and we don't really have a clear way to deal with them. We're low on Estus. That guard is guarding our descent. don't necessarily have a backup plan because there's enemies blocking our escape route. And we still have to take fall damage to even get down from here. We can do a little bit by using our ranged attacks from up here to clear the way, but we're still in fairly dire straits here. Now would be a good time to use one of our extra Estus healing items, an Ember. When used, Embers not only restore you to your Ember form, they refill your health completely. So they can be a useful last-ditch healing item if you feel like you need one final push to get to safety. Let's see what we can do with it. Immediately we want to put some distance between ourselves and the tougher enemies. Easier said than done. Here we can make use of the environment as a choke point. We can artificially limit the amount of enemies we have to fight at once by corralling them to this door area. Also, be careful when fighting around chests, by the way. If you hit them too many times with your weapon, they will break and you will only get rubbish. The area has now been more or less cleared out. There's a couple of remaining enemies, but on their own they don't pose too dire of a threat. For our thorough exploration of the area, we are rewarded with an incredibly valuable Estus shard. Turning this into Andre the Blacksmith will allow us to increase the number of blasts we can carry with us. Looking down in this little nook here, after defeating the Guardian Dog, we also find the cell key. Not every area is like the High Wall of Lothric. No area is exactly the same as another. However, that does not necessarily mean that you cannot take lessons that you learn from one area of the game and apply them to other areas. Most areas in Dark Souls follow the same sort of general designed logic. They're recursive, they reward exploration, they reward retracing your steps in a different way, and they reward prudence. Speaking of prudence, an important part of exploration is knowing when it's time to quit. We have no more healing items, not even an emergency Ember, and there are some fairly powerful enemies lurking in this courtyard. Since we have cleared this area out of items... Oh, almost. There's one I missed here. Like I said, always break things. We don't necessarily have to come here again, so simply retreating back to the bonfire in safety is not necessarily a loss of time or efficiency. In fact, by being cautious, we will probably save time. There is also the matter of exploring the alternate route that we found before we entered this housing complex. by that. By exploring this, and being ready to retreat at a moment's notice, we find that this is simply an alternate way down to the same courtyard, one that's much faster. Essentially, now there is almost no penalty at all in going back to the bonfire being safe about it. Plowing through when you're low on resources can be very rewarding, but it can also be very dangerous and ultimately a waste of time. Erring on the side of caution will almost always get you farther in this game. One of the reasons why is that once you have cleared out the enemies, traversal is actually quite easy. It does not take very long to get from point A to point B if you know the way, and everything is dead. Foreknowledge of the area and further run-throughs will actually also let you simply ignore enemies and dash past them. This can be dangerous, but is also very quick. Also useful for boss runs. So in review, what we have learned today is how to efficiently and safely explore an area in Dark Souls 3, and honestly, most previous Dark Souls games. The general design philosophies usually hold true. There are exceptions, of course. We have learned to manage our resources effectively by making sure that we get the most out of our Estus flasks and be aware of our alternative healing options. We have learned to assess threats in the form of enemy and environmental dangers and how to deal with them by experimenting with their attack patterns while taking a defensive posture. And we've learned how to explore thoroughly by, among other things, breaking everything. So, before we wrap up entirely, I would like to ask if anybody has any questions or comments or whatever that I can answer while I'm available. Now, I have the foreknowledge and the warnings from other players in the form of these messages and bloodstains that this chest is a mimic. Mimics are terrible foes. They are quite capable of killing you. However, there is a way to get a mimic item without necessarily invoking a fight. We picked up some undead hunter charms earlier, and if you throw one at the mimic, it falls asleep. We can get its loot without ever putting ourselves in danger. The mimic does drop a fairly healthy bounty of souls, but it's also a very dangerous enemy for this point in the game. So simply throwing a charm at it might just be the best option. At this point, charms are fairly limited, but you also probably won't be actually using their intended effect of blocking Estus because in the game, you're probably not going to get very much PvP action. So using one on a safe to get the deep battle axe is, in my opinion, perfectly valid use of it. Alright, well, I think that'll just about do it for today if nobody has any questions and I was clear on everything. Thank you for tuning in. I will probably do the next episode on Monday, same time, same place. I'm not quite sure what our topic for that day will be, but now that we're sort of getting through some of the bare basics on just how to play the game in general, hopefully we can do some more advanced things. Talk about specific builds and stuff and specific contingencies that people have problems with. At any rate, thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you then.